Home is where our stories begin. Our Town, Our Kids works with local Kansas communities to reduce the number of their youth at risk for involvement in the juvenile justice system.
Hi, my name is April Terry, and I'm a partner on the OTOK project. Today I will be talking about the intake and assessment process for youth in Kansas. We will start by first talking about the recent juvenile justice reform efforts, followed by the juvenile intake and assessment services intake process, and end with a brief discussion on assessments. In 2015, the Kansas Department of Corrections Juvenile Services re-examined the juvenile justice system in Kansas. Senate Bill 367 was a product of this process and is the largest juvenile justice reform bill since 1996. While Senate Bill 367 will be discussed in greater detail in another video, it should be noted now that as one small part of Senate Bill 367, the reform called for limiting pre-adjudication detention by law enforcement, expansion of community-based detention alternatives, and the tailoring of the length of the court jurisdiction, supervision, service, and system responses to a youth's risks and needs. This process encourages clear guidelines for removing a youth from their home, as an investment in community-based programs is a must. When a youth finds themselves at a juvenile intake and assessment center, they most likely came into contact with a law enforcement officer. As a few examples, the youth may have been referred by their school, their family, possibly referred to as a walk-in, or a community member. Kansas has 31 judicial districts as set by the Kansas Constitution, and all districts have a juvenile intake and assessment services center. Some jurisdictions have more than one county assigned to them. Each judicial district operates a juvenile intake and assessment services program and services both child in need of care, or SINC cases, as well as juvenile offenders, or JOs, taken into custody by law enforcement. Some districts run their own centers, while others contract out services, complete the services at their local detention facilities, and others are staffed by on-call workers. Regardless of how they are run, standards require they be open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with a response to law enforcement within 10 minutes of their notification. This assessment process helps identify immediate risks and needs while making release and placement recommendations. As stated in policy, all youth processed through the juvenile intake and assessment services shall have their case referred to the local intermediate intervention program, the county district attorney, or the Department for Children and Families, also known as DCF. In a few moments, you will have a chance to hear further about some of the assessments that they use. To provide some context to the youth of the juvenile intake and assessment services, in fiscal year 2018, there were over 14,000 intakes completed in Kansas. Of those, 43% were SINC cases and 57% were juvenile offender youth. SINC cases are then referred to the Kansas Department for Children and Families. The DCF is accountable for many roles in Kansas. In addition to providing aid and oversight to SINC cases, they monitor the Child Abuse and Neglect Central Registry and provide child support enforcement and temporary assistance for needy families, to name a few. This flowchart provides a visual for importance of the intake and assessment centers and are the starting point once a complaint is realized. You can see each step of the decision-making process after completion of the intake process. Now that an overview of these centers are complete, it is important to briefly understand the different instruments being administered. Within 30 minutes of the initial conversation with law enforcement, the assessment process should begin. The Kansas Detention Assessment Instrument is new to Senate Bill 367 and is an instrument used to see if a youth between 10 and 17 years of age qualifies for lodging in a juvenile detention center, or JDC, based on their risk of failing to appear in court. This tool is not to be used on sync cases, agreement to appear notices, or walk-in intakes. Also new to Senate Bill 367 is the notice to appear. These are issued once law enforcement may not take a youth into custody, but directly release them to their parents or cite them for an offense. They are given a notice to appear by law enforcement so the intake assessment can be completed within 48 hours of the contact with law enforcement. The flowchart you can see now pinpoints where the juvenile intake and assessment centers fit within the juvenile justice process, as well as the 3 options for release or placement. The first option is being released to a parent or legal custodian. The second is being placed in a shelter facility or attendant care center. Lastly, the youth may be admitted into a juvenile detention center. There are specific parameters surrounding which youth are eligible for placement into the JDC. These intake facilities also complete assessments and screen for any needs such as mental health services or substance abuse issues, while also checking on past and current abuse and neglect. The MAYSI tool, fully known as the Massachusetts Youth Screening Instrument second version, is part of the screening and referral process. The MAYSI is appropriate for youth between 12 and 17 years of age who may be referred as either sync cases or juvenile offender cases, those offered an agreement to appear, and even for walk-in intakes. For youth who score within predetermined ranges on the suicidal ideation questions will then, at a minimum, be given the MAYSI 2 Suicide Ideation Secondary Screening. If youth score at or above the caution cutoff on any of the subscales, the intake worker will refer for further mental health assessment. Other possible referrals may include services for crisis intervention, family-related issues and parenting skills, problems at school such as truancy issues, and even gender-responsive programming, to name a few. Generally, the intake worker would discuss the assessment results and recommendations with the youth and guardian unless it's not in the best interest of the youth. As referenced in the Decision Points video, after the intake and assessment process is completed, moving forward for each youth should look uniquely different. For example, the court may decide to adjudicate the youth on juvenile charges. A court service officer employed through the Office of Judicial Administration would complete a pre-sentence investigation, or PSI, on the youth. This process involves completing a YLS CMI, or Youth Level of Service Case Management Inventory, on the youth. This instrument is a risk needs assessment and a case management tool combined into one specific for youth. The results of this assessment help workers identify the youth's needs, strengths, barriers, and incentives. There are 8 domains on the YLS CMI to include prior and current offenses or dispositions, education and employment, substance abuse, personality and behavior, family circumstances and parenting, peer relations, leisure and recreation, and attitudes and orientation. Each of these domains are labeled as either static, unable to change, or dynamic, something warranting intervention and change, risk factors. The top 4, or the big 4 risk factors, those known to be the highest in predicting juvenile recidivism or reoffense rates, are criminal history, antisocial attitudes, antisocial personality, and antisocial associates or peers. Within each of the domains exists specific risk factors. In total, there are 42 items on the checklist. The YLS CMI should drive disposition, or sentencing recommendations, as well as treatment and supervision planning. As such, it is best to conduct such assessments post-adjudication and pre-disposition. Utilizing assessments as this will help shift decision-making towards a supervision level consistent with the posed risk and needs of the youth. More detailed information on the role of the YLS CMI and other risk assessments will be provided in additional training modules. For more information, including all information from this video, please go to the group's webpage at www.ourtownourkids.org. Thank you.
Our Town, Our Kids is a pilot project funded through the Kansas Department of Corrections, Kansas Advisory Group, and the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. The university group is K-State Juvenile Justice Collaborative, a multidisciplinary team from Kansas State University, Fort Hays State University, and K-State Extension. Ultimately, Our Town, Our Kids aims to empower local communities with a scalable, comprehensive set of tools which will stand as an exemplar to other counties across Kansas and beyond. For more information, please go to our website at ourtownourkids.org or reach out to us directly with questions, concerns, and feedback. Thank you for your time and attention.